In Atlanta's newly christened Sentinel Arena, a grizzled veteran was about to face a much younger fighter in what was meant to be a respectful exhibition. A charity event honoring war heroes turned deadly when a rising MMA star publicly humiliated his opponent and mocked his battlefield scars. Steven Seagal wasn't your typical ringside spectator. For over 6 decades, he was a martial arts master, former law enforcement officer, an Aikido legend known for neutralizing opponents with flowing precision and never losing his center. When Malik, Warpath, Jordan dared to taunt a decorated veteran and challenged Seagal himself to enter the cage, he had no idea he was inviting the storm. Seagal responded with a silent approach and a stance honed over a lifetime, triggering a seismic moment of reckoning. What began as a charity exhibition would become a historic transformation. The city of Atlanta and the fight world would never be the same after Steven Seagal climbed into that cage and unleashed hell. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Atlanta skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sentinel Arena, its newest architectural crown jewel rising from the heart of the city like a monument to modern ambition. Tonight, however, ambition took a back seat to honor. Red, white, and blue banners cascaded from the rafters, each one bearing the name of a fallen hero. Police officers, firefighters, military veterans who had given everything for something greater than themselves. Captain Anika Sloan stood at the edge of the arena floor, her former Army Ranger training evident in the way she surveyed every detail with tactical precision. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and despite trading her combat boots for designer heels, she still carried herself like someone who could clear a room if necessary. This was her vision made manifest, a place where warriors of different kinds could meet on equal ground, where respect flowed both ways. "Ma'am, the VIP section is filling up," her assistant whispered, clipboard in hand. "We've got the mayor, 3 congressmen, and Steven Seagal." Anika finished, her eyes tracking a familiar figure moving through the crowd with understated grace. He actually came. At 71, Steven Seagal moved like water through the throng of suited dignitaries and media personalities. His black suit was impeccable but unremarkable, save for the small American flag pin on his lapel. No entourage, no fanfare, just a man who had lived long enough to understand that true power didn't announce itself. He declined the offered escort service with a polite gesture, preferring to find his front row seat on his own terms. The arena's 18,000 seats were nearly full, a diverse crowd united by anticipation and reverence. Military families sat alongside MMA enthusiasts, their children clutching programs featuring tonight's featured exhibition bout. This wasn't about rankings or title shots. It was about something deeper, something that had been missing from modern combat sports. In the commentary booth, Javier Vega adjusted his headset as he watched the arena fill. A former lightweight champion turned broadcaster, Javier had seen every kind of fight night imaginable, but tonight felt different. The energy was more restrained, more respectful, like being in a cathedral rather than a coliseum. "Ladies and gentlemen," Javier's voice carried across the arena and into millions of homes. "Welcome to the Sentinel Arena's inaugural event. I'm Javier Vega, and I have to tell you, in 20 years of covering fights, I've never seen anything quite like this." The camera swept across the crowd, capturing faces both famous and anonymous. A decorated Marine adjusting his dress blues. A police widow clutching her late husband's badge. Children wearing T-shirts with their deployed parents' unit patches. Tyler "Ty Knox," the social media influencer with his ever-present phone, seemed unusually subdued as he took in the atmosphere. "This isn't just another fight night," Javier continued. "Tonight, we honor those who fight for more than victory. They fight for all of us." Deep in the arena's preparation area, Lieutenant Darius Steele Booker sat alone on a wooden bench, methodically wrapping his hands with white tape. At 48, every line on his weathered face told a story of service and sacrifice. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw, courtesy of a bank robber's shotgun blast, caught the harsh fluorescent light as he worked. 15 years on the force, 10 of those with SWAT. He'd kicked down doors, talked down suicides, and carried wounded officers to safety more times than he cared to count. The limp in his left leg, a permanent reminder of the day he'd thrown himself between a hostage and a killer's gun, had forced his retirement 2 years ago. But tonight, he was back, not as a cop, but as a symbol. Darius, a production assistant, peeked around the corner. 5 minutes, sir. He nodded without looking up, finishing the last wrap around his right hand. The tape was snug, but not tight. He'd learned long ago that preparation was everything, whether you were serving a high-risk warrant or stepping into a cage. His movements were deliberate, economical, the muscle memory of a man who had learned to waste nothing, not time, not energy, not opportunity. The distant sound of crowd noise filtered through the concrete walls. Darius had faced down armed criminals, survived 3 tours in Afghanistan before joining the force, and stared death in the face more times than most people faced Monday mornings. But tonight, the butterflies were different. Tonight, he wasn't fighting for his life or someone else's. He was fighting for memory, for respect, for the idea that service mattered. Back in the arena, Steven Seagal had settled into his seat with characteristic stillness. Those who recognized him whispered excitedly, but he acknowledged their attention with only the slightest nod. His dark eyes, still sharp despite his years, took in everything: the crowd's energy, the setup, the subtle tensions that most people missed. This was a man who had spent decades reading rooms, reading people, understanding the currents that flowed beneath the surface of human interaction. A young fan approached nervously, program in hand, but Seagal gently declined the autograph request with a gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and finality. Tonight, he was here as a witness, not a celebrity. Captain Sloan caught his eye from across the arena floor and offered a small salute of acknowledgement. She had personally written the invitation, explaining her vision for the Sentinel, a place where different kinds of warriors could meet, where the values of service and sacrifice could be celebrated alongside athletic achievement. That Steven Seagal had accepted meant more to her than any corporate sponsorship or celebrity endorsement. The house lights began to dim, and the crowd's conversation faded to an expectant hush. Tonight would feature several exhibition bouts, but the main event, if it could be called that, was the meeting between Lieutenant Darius Booker and the rising MMA star who had volunteered to face him in what was supposed to be a respectful, technical demonstration of skill. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Please welcome the men and women who have made tonight possible. Our veterans, our first responders, our everyday heroes who serve something greater than themselves. The crowd rose as one, a wave of appreciation washing across the arena. In the VIP section, congressmen and celebrities stood alongside Gold Star mothers and Purple Heart recipients. The applause wasn't the wild, tribal cheering of a typical fight night. It was deeper, more meaningful, the sound of a community honoring its protectors. From his seat in the front row, Steven Seagal observed it all with the stillness of a mountain lake. His presence was quiet but unmistakable, like a tuning fork that had been struck but not yet heard. Those who knew him understood. When Steven Seagal was truly still, truly quiet, it meant he was listening to something the rest of the world had missed. The stage was set. The arena was full. The warriors were ready. And somewhere in the preparation area, a very different kind of warrior was about to make his entrance. The arena's atmosphere shifted like a sudden weather change when the lights cut to black. Gone was the respectful, ceremonial energy, replaced by something electric and dangerous. Bass-heavy music erupted from the sound system, a pounding rhythm that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Sentinel. Red and gold pyrotechnics exploded from the entrance tunnel, and through the smoke stepped a figure who embodied everything modern combat sports had become. Malik, Warpath. Jordan moved like a caged predator finally released. At 26, he stood 6 feet 2 inches of sculpted menace, his physique a testament to obsessive training and genetic gifts. Tribal tattoos wrapped around his neck and arms like war paint, and his shaved head gleamed under the arena lights. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, dark, hungry, and utterly without mercy. Making his way to the cage, the announcer's voice boomed over the thunderous music. With a perfect professional record of 16 wins, 0 losses, 14 by knockout, the Prince of Punishment, Malik, Warpath, Jordan. The crowd's reaction was split down the middle. Half erupted in wild cheers, drawn to the raw charisma and undeniable skill of the undefeated fighter. The other half, particularly the veterans and their families, watched with wary silence, sensing something off about the young man's energy. Tyler Knox was in his element, phone held high as he live-streamed his reaction to his millions of followers. Yo, yo, yo. The future just walked into the building. He shouted over the noise. This dude is about to put on a masterclass in violence. Old school versus new school, and we all know how this story ends. In the commentary booth, Javier Vega's professional smile tightened almost imperceptibly. For those unfamiliar with Malik Jordan, he's been called the most naturally gifted fighter of his generation. His rise through the ranks has been meteoric. His knockout power is legitimate, but his methods... Javier paused, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say he's known for psychological warfare as much as physical dominance. Malik bounded up the cage steps with explosive energy, his every movement calculated for maximum visual impact. He grabbed the microphone from the cage announcer, his voice carrying easily over the crowd noise. Atlanta, he shouted, arms spread wide. Y'all ready to see what the future looks like? The arena erupted, but not uniformly. While his younger fans screamed approval, many of the veterans and their families remained notably quiet. I respect what tonight stands for, Malik continued, his voice dripping with theatrical sincerity. I respect the service, I respect the sacrifice. But let's be real. His tone shifted subtly, becoming more cutting. This is a combat sport, not a museum tour. I'm here to put on a show, not a history lesson. Captain Sloane's fingers tightened around her program. From her position at cage side, she could see the subtle shift in the crowd's mood. This wasn't what she had envisioned. This wasn't what she had planned. From the front row, Steven Seagal watched with the same serene stillness, but those who knew him might have noticed the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. He had seen this type before. Talent corrupted by ego, skill poisoned by disrespect. The music changed, transforming from aggressive rap to a solemn military march. The contrast was jarring, like switching from a nightclub to a cathedral in an instant. The announcer's voice, when it came, carried a weight and gravity that had been absent from Malik's introduction. And now, making his way to the cage, a man who has served his community and his country with distinction. A decorated veteran of 3 combat deployments, a recipient of the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, and a 15-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department's SWAT division. Please welcome Lieutenant Darius Steele Booker. The arena erupted in respectful applause, but this time it was unified. Even Malik's fans recognized the moment, standing and clapping as the veteran emerged from the tunnel. There were no pyrotechnics, no elaborate production, just a man walking with quiet dignity toward a challenge he didn't need to accept, but chose to face anyway. Darius moved with the deliberate gait of someone whose left leg had been rebuilt with steel pins and determination. His gray-flecked hair was cropped military short, and his physique, while solid, spoke of functional strength rather than gym-sculpted aesthetics. Where Malik's body was a weapon forged for display, Darius's was a tool hardened by purpose. Veterans throughout the arena rose to their feet. Some saluted. Others placed hands over hearts. A few wiped away tears, seeing in Darius's careful steps their own struggles with injuries both visible and hidden. This is what a real warrior looks like, an elderly Korean War veteran whispered to his grandson, his voice thick with emotion. Steven Seagal stood with the rest, his movement catching the attention of a nearby cameraman. For a moment, the arena's big screens showed the legendary martial artist paying his respects to the approaching veteran. The image, Seagal's composed, respectful expression as he honored another warrior, sent a ripple of recognition through the crowd. Malik, still bouncing on his toes in the center of the cage, watched Darius's approach with eyes that had narrowed to calculating slits. Where others saw dignity and service, Malik saw opportunity and weakness. The veteran's careful movements, the subtle favor he showed his left leg, the methodical way he climbed the cage steps, all of it registered in Malik's mind as tactical advantages. When Darius finally stood across from him in the cage, the contrast was stark. Youth versus experience, flash versus substance, hunger versus honor. The referee called them to the center for final instructions. Standard exhibition rules. Light contact, no elbows, no knees to the head, stop when directed. This was meant to be a demonstration of skill, not a destruction of dignity. Malik extended his gloved hand for the traditional pre-fight glove touch. Darius stepped forward, his own hand extended in the universal gesture of sportsmanship. At the last second, Malik pulled his hand back and flexed for the crowd instead. The arena fell silent. Even Tyler Knox stopped talking to his phone, staring at the display of disrespect with his mouth slightly open. In the commentary booth, Javier Vega's voice carried a note of disbelief. Did he just refuse the glove touch? In an exhibition bout with a decorated veteran? The referee looked between the two fighters, unsure how to proceed. This was unprecedented territory, a breach of protocol that went beyond gamesmanship into something uglier. Darius didn't react with anger or surprise. He'd seen worse from drug dealers and bank robbers. Instead, he simply nodded once and stepped back into his stance. If this young man wanted to make it ugly, so be it. Darius had faced down worse than wounded pride. But in the front row, Steven Seagal's stillness took on a different quality. Where before he had been observing, now he was evaluating. Where before he had been listening, now he was judging. The bell rang. Malik exploded forward like a spring unleashed, his fists flying in combinations that blurred with speed and precision. But these weren't the light, technical strikes of an exhibition. These were full-power shots designed to hurt, to humiliate, to make a statement at the expense of a man who deserved better. Darius, caught off guard by the sudden aggression, managed to slip most of the initial flurry, but took a hard right hand to the ribs that doubled him over. The crowd gasped as the veteran staggered, his face showing the first flash of pain. This is supposed to be an exhibition, Captain Sloan shouted to the referee, but her voice was lost in the arena noise. Malik pressed his advantage, backing Darius against the cage with a barrage of strikes that had nothing to do with sport and everything to do with domination. When Darius tried to clinch to slow the pace, Malik threw an illegal elbow that caught the veteran flush on the temple, right over his old scar. The impact was audible even over the crowd noise. Darius's knees buckled, and he slumped against the cage wall, blood trickling from the reopened wound. The referee finally stepped in, waving his arms to stop the action, but Malik had already made his point. As medical personnel rushed to check on Darius, Malik strutted around the cage with his arms raised, playing to his section of the crowd like he had just won a championship. "That's what I'm talking about," he shouted into the microphone heat. Grabbed again. "This is a young man's game. Time to step aside and let the future take over." But it was what he said next that changed everything. Standing over the still-seated Darius, Malik looked directly into the camera and then turned toward the front row. His eyes found Steven Seagal, still standing motionless among the crowd of concerned faces. "This your hero?" Malik called out, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "Y'all brought a broken cop to a killer's cage. What's next? Gonna wheel out Grandpa in the front row to show me some movie karate?" The arena fell into stunned silence. Even Tyler Knox had stopped recording, staring at the cage with his mouth open. Malik wasn't finished. "You want next, old man? Come on up here and show us what those movie moves look like against a real fighter." From the front row, Steven Seagal remained perfectly still. His face showed no emotion, no reaction to the taunt. But those who knew him, really knew him, understood that the absence of reaction was the most dangerous reaction of all. The silence stretched on, thick with tension and disbelief. Somewhere in that silence, a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. And Steven Seagal had heard enough. The medical team worked efficiently around Darius Booker, checking his pupils for signs of concussion while pressing gauze to the reopened scar on his temple. The veteran sat quietly on the stool they'd brought him, his breathing steady despite the blood seeping through the white bandage. He'd taken worse hits in back alleys and foreign deserts, but this felt different, more personal, more deliberately cruel. Malik Jordan paced the cage like a caged animal, his adrenaline still surging from the one-sided beating he'd just delivered. The referee had called a temporary halt to check on Darius, but Malik was already looking past his injured opponent toward bigger prey. "You good, old man?" Malik called out mockingly, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet arena. "Need me to call you an ambulance?" Maybe get you a wheelchair? Captain Sloan stood at cage side, her hands clenched into fists as she fought the urge to climb into the cage herself. This was her event, her vision, and it was being perverted into something ugly right before her eyes. She caught the referee's attention and made a cutting motion across her throat. In this now. But Malik wasn't finished. He grabbed the microphone. Again, his voice booming through the arena's sound system. "This is what happens when you live in the past," he declared, strutting around the cage with his arms spread wide. "This is what happens when you think your little war stories mean something in a real fighter's world." The crowd's reaction was swift and harsh. Boos rained down from every section, but Malik seemed to feed off the negative energy, his smile growing wider with each catcall. "You brought a broken-down cop to face the future of fighting," he continued, his voice rising to match the crowd's disapproval. "What's next? Gonna dig up some more relics from the museum?" That's when his eyes found their target again. Steven Seagal sat in the front row, as motionless as carved stone. His dark suit was immaculate, his posture perfect, his face an unreadable mask. While the crowd around him shouted and gestured, he remained utterly still, a point of calm in a sea of chaos. "Speaking of relics," Malik said, pointing directly at the martial arts legend. "How about you, Grandpa? You've been sitting there real quiet, looking all serious. You think you're some kind of tough guy because you made some movies 40 years ago?" The arena fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, charged with possibility and danger. Even Tyler Knox lowered his phone, sensing that something significant was about to happen. In the commentary booth, Javier Vega leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "He's calling out Steven Seagal. He's actually calling out Steven Seagal. This young man has no idea what he's doing. Come on, movie star." Malik continued, his voice taking on a mocking sing-song quality. "You want to sit there and act all mysterious and wise? Put your money where your mouth is. Step up here and show us what those choreographed fight scenes taught you about real combat." Steven Seagal's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't even blink. But something in the arena's atmosphere shifted, like the moment before a lightning strike, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. "What's the matter, Sensei Steven?" Malik pressed, his voice dripping with contempt. "All that Aikido bullshit. Work better with stunt coordinators than real fighters? You just gonna sit there like a wax dummy while a real warrior shows you how it's done?" Behind Malik, Darius Booker had stood up from his stool, waving off the medical team. Blood still seeped from his temple, but his eyes were clear and angry. He took a step toward Malik, but the referee quickly intervened, positioning himself between the veteran and the younger fighter. "This isn't over," Darius said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for Malik to hear. Malik laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the arena. "Oh, it's over, old man. You're done. But movie star over there," he pointed at Seagal again. "He's got all that Hollywood tough guy reputation to protect. Unless he's too scared to find out what happens when make-believe meets reality." "Captain." Sloan had heard enough. She grabbed the microphone from the ring announcer and keyed it up. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief intermission to know." The voice was quiet, barely audible over the arena's sound system, but it carried with unmistakable authority. Steven Seagal had spoken for the first time all evening, and though his voice was soft, it somehow reached every corner of the building. He stood slowly, his movements fluid and economical. The simple action of rising from his seat seemed to draw the attention of all 18,000 people in the arena. As he stood, he reached up and carefully removed the small American flag pin from his lapel, placing it gently in the seat beside him. The gesture was small, almost ceremonial, but it carried weight. By removing the flag pin, he was separating his personal actions from any representation of country or cause. This was about something more fundamental: respect, honor, and the understanding that some lines should never be crossed. "Oh, now he stands up," Malik crowed, his voice full of theatrical delight. "Took you long enough, old man. You coming up here or just stretching your legs?" Seagal began walking toward the cage, his pace unhurried but purposeful. The crowd seemed to part naturally before him, creating a clear path to the cage steps. There was no hesitation in his movement, no warming up or preparation, just a man walking toward a destination he'd already accepted. "Look at this." Tyler Knox whispered into his phone, finally remembering to record. Steven Seagal is actually walking to the cage. This is insane. This is actually happening. As Seagal approached the cage, Captain Sloan intercepted him. She looked up into his calm, dark eyes, seeing something there that made her decision for her. "Sir, you don't have to do this," she said quietly, her voice meant for him alone. "Yes," he replied simply, "I do." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then stepped aside and nodded to the cage-side officials. Within seconds, the cage door was opening, and Steven Seagal was stepping onto the canvas. The transformation in the arena was immediate and profound. The crowd, which had been buzzing with nervous energy and excitement, fell into a reverent hush. This wasn't just a celebrity making a surprise appearance. This was a master craftsman entering his workshop. Malik, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with excitement and adrenaline. Finally, we get to see what the great Steven Seagal is really made of. No cameras, no stunt doubles, no special effects. Just you and me, old man. Seagal removed his suit jacket and handed it to an official outside the cage. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt that revealed arms still corded with muscle despite his 71 years. He kicked off his dress shoes and stood barefoot on the canvas, his stance relaxed but centered. The referee looked between the two men, one bouncing with youthful aggression, the other standing like a rooted tree, and realized he was about to oversee something unprecedented in combat sports history. "Gentlemen, this is still an exhibition," the referee said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Like contact, respect your opponent, and listen to my instructions." Malik snorted with laughter. "Like contact? This dinosaur wanted to play, so we're going to play for real. No movie magic. No gentle sparring. Let's see what 40 years of Hollywood training gets you against a real killer." Steven Seagal said nothing. He simply stood in the center of the cage, his hands relaxed at his sides, his breathing steady and deep. When the referee looked at him for acknowledgement of the rules, Seagal nodded once. Barely perceptible, but enough. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The referee backed away, his hand poised to signal the beginning of what would either be the most one-sided beating in combat sports history or something else entirely. "You ready to get embarrassed, movie star?" Malik taunted, bouncing on his toes as he had before every fight of his professional career. Steven Seagal's response was to become even more still, if such a thing were possible. His eyes, dark and patient, remained fixed on Malik with the unwavering focus of a predator that had already chosen its moment to strike. The arena held its breath. The referee raised his hand. And in that moment, everyone present understood they were about to witness something that would be talked about for decades to come. The moment stretched like a held breath, time seeming to slow as the referee's hand hovered in the air. In that suspended instant, the fundamental difference between the two men became crystal clear. Malik Jordan was all kinetic energy, bouncing, flexing, psyching himself up for another display of dominance. Steven Seagal was the opposite of motion, centered, grounded, present in a way that made everything around him seem insubstantial. The referee's hand dropped. "Fight!" Malik exploded forward immediately, just as he had against Darius, his fists flying in the same devastating combinations that had built his reputation. But this time, something was different. Where Darius had been caught off guard by the sudden aggression, Seagal seemed to expect it. Not just expect it, but welcome it. The first punch, a lightning-fast jab aimed at Seagal's head, passed through empty air. Seagal hadn't ducked or dodged. He had simply moved his head exactly the distance necessary to let the strike pass harmlessly by. The second punch, a powerful cross, met the same fate, avoided not through athletic scrambling, but through what appeared to be perfect timing and minimal movement. "What the hell?" Malik muttered, resetting his stance and throwing another combination. Again, the strikes found nothing but air. Seagal's footwork was unlike anything the MMA world had seen. Not the lateral movement of a boxer or the angular steps of a kickboxer, but something more fluid, more economical. He moved like water flowing around stones, never fighting the current, but always finding the path of least resistance. The crowd began to murmur, sensing that what they were witnessing wasn't following the expected script. Tyler Knox held his phone higher, trying to capture every angle. "This is crazy," he whispered to his audience. Seagal isn't even trying to hit him back. He's just flowing. In the commentary booth, Javier Vega struggled to find words for what he was seeing. "This is unlike anything I've ever called." Malik is throwing with full power and precision, but it's like he's fighting a ghost. Seagal isn't countering, isn't attacking. He's just not there when the punches arrive. Malik's frustration was beginning to show. His combinations became more aggressive, more desperate. He threw a spinning elbow, the same illegal technique that had opened Darius's cut, but Seagal stepped inside the rotation, his body position suddenly close enough to Malik's that the elbow had no room to generate power. For a moment, the two men were chest to chest, and Malik felt something he hadn't experienced in years of professional fighting: complete helplessness. Seagal's presence was overwhelming, not through aggression but through absolute certainty. In that instant, Malik understood he was in the presence of something far beyond his experience. Then Seagal stepped back, his hands still at his sides, his expression unchanged. "What are you doing?" Malik shouted, his voice carrying frustration and confusion. "Fight me. Stop running and fight." Steven Seagal finally spoke, his voice calm and clear enough to be heard throughout the silent arena. "I'm not running." To prove his point, he stopped moving entirely. He stood in the center of the cage, feet planted, hands relaxed, and waited. Malik couldn't resist the invitation. He launched himself forward with a wild haymaker that carried all his power and frustration. It was the kind of punch that had knocked out 12 of his previous opponents, a fight-ending blow that few men could survive. Seagal caught Malik's wrist as the punch approached, not blocking it, but redirecting it in a spiral motion that used the younger man's own momentum against him. The technique was so smooth, so effortless, that it looked more like a dance move than a combat technique. Malik spun with his own punch, his balance completely destroyed. He stumbled forward, his back now to Seagal, completely vulnerable. For a moment that felt like an eternity, he waited for the inevitable counterattack, the strikes that would end the fight and his career. Instead, Seagal simply stepped away and resumed his centered stance. The arena erupted in a mixture of cheers and gasps, but underneath the noise was a current of something deeper, recognition that they were witnessing mastery of a completely different order. "Did you see that?" Javier Vega's voice carried amazement. He could have ended this fight right there. Malik was completely exposed, completely vulnerable, and Seagal just let him go. Tyler Knox had stopped talking to his phone entirely, staring at the cage with his mouth open. Around him, other spectators were having similar reactions, the gradual realization that this wasn't a fight in any conventional sense. Malik spun around, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "What kind of game are you playing, old man? Hit me back." "Why?" Seagal asked, the question carrying genuine curiosity rather than mockery. The simple question seemed to short-circuit something in Malik's brain. He stared at Seagal for a moment, then launched into another flurry of strikes. This time, however, his technique was sloppier, his timing off. Desperation was replacing strategy. Seagal continued his flowing defense, but now he began to add something new: gentle contact. Not strikes, not attacks, but touches. As Malik threw a right cross, Seagal redirected it with one hand while placing his other palm lightly on Malik's chest. The contact lasted only a second, but it was enough to completely disrupt Malik's balance and send him stumbling backward. "How are you doing that?" Malik demanded, his breathing becoming labored from the constant attacks that were yielding nothing. Captain Sloan watched from cage side, her earlier anxiety replaced by something approaching awe. This was what she had hoped the Sentinel Arena would represent. Not just athletic competition, but the demonstration of principles that went beyond winning and losing. Behind her, Master Tenzin had appeared as if from nowhere. The elderly Tibetan monk watched the proceedings with serene interest, his presence noticed by few but felt by those who mattered. He leaned close to Captain Sloan and whispered in heavily accented English, "Now the river bends." In the cage, Malik made one final desperate attempt to land a significant strike. He threw a flying knee, putting every ounce of his remaining energy into a technique that had never failed him before. Seagal sidestepped the knee and caught Malik's leg as he landed, not violently, but with complete control. For a moment, Malik stood on one foot, held in perfect balance by his opponent's gentle grip. "You don't have to do this," Seagal said quietly. His voice meant for Malik alone. "Yes, I do," Malik replied, but his voice carried less conviction than before. Seagal released his leg and stepped back once more. "No," he said simply. "You don't." The exchange had lasted less than 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. Malik stood in the center of the cage, breathing hard, his earlier confidence completely shattered. He had thrown everything he had at an opponent who seemed to exist in a different dimension of combat, one where violence was met not with violence, but with something far more devastating: complete understanding. Around the arena, the crowd had fallen into a hushed reverence. Even those who had come expecting blood and spectacle understood they were witnessing something profound, a master class in the difference between fighting and mastery. Steven Seagal stood as he had begun, centered and calm, his presence filling the cage without effort or display. He had made his point without throwing a single strike, had demonstrated his superiority without causing harm, had answered disrespect with something far more powerful than revenge. He had shown them the difference between a warrior and a fighter. And in doing so, he had changed everyone in the arena, most of all the young man who stood before him, finally understanding that he had challenged not just a movie star or a martial artist, but a living embodiment of principles he had never considered. The real fight was just beginning. The silence in the Sentinel Arena was different now, expectant, reverent, like the hush that falls over a cathedral during a sacred ceremony. Malik Jordan reset his stance for what felt like the 100th time, his chest heaving from the exertion of throwing strikes that consistently found nothing but air. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the brief duration of their encounter. Steven Seagal remained exactly as he had been since entering the cage, centered, grounded, impossibly calm. His breathing was so steady it appeared he hadn't exerted himself at all. Where Malik's energy was explosive and diminishing, Seagal's presence seemed to grow more profound with each passing moment. "This is impossible," Malik muttered under his breath, then louder. "Stop playing games with me, old man." He launched into his most devastating combination, a sequence that had put away 3 consecutive opponents in the first round. Left hook to the body, right uppercut, spinning heel kick. Each technique was thrown with championship-level precision and power. Seagal moved through the combination like smoke through fingers. The left hook passed by his ribs as he rotated slightly at the waist. The uppercut found empty air as his head moved just enough to let it pass. The spinning heel kick, Malik's signature finishing move, swept through the space where Seagal's head had been a microsecond before. But this time, Seagal didn't simply evade. As Malik completed his spin, off balance and momentarily vulnerable, Seagal placed his right palm gently against the younger man's chest. The contact was brief, barely a touch, but the effect was immediate and devastating. Malik's forward momentum stopped instantly, and he stumbled backward 3 steps before catching himself against the cage wall. The stunned expression on his face suggested he'd just encountered something beyond his understanding of physics. What the hell was that? Tyler Knox whispered to his phone, his usual bravado replaced by genuine awe. "Did you see that?" He barely touched him and sent him flying. In the commentary booth, Javier Vega struggled to find words. "I've been calling fights for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. That wasn't a strike, it was more. Like," he paused, searching for the right comparison, "like watching water redirect a boulder." Malik pushed off the cage wall, his eyes wide with confusion and growing respect. "How are you doing that?" Steven Seagal's response was to shift his stance slightly, his feet adjusting by mere inches. To most observers, nothing had changed. But to Malik, facing him directly, the alteration was profound. Seagal had somehow become more present, more grounded, more impossible to read. "Your teacher never showed you the difference between force and power," Seagal said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent arena. "What are you talking about?" Malik demanded, but his usual aggression was tempered now by uncertainty. Instead of answering, Seagal did something unexpected. He closed his eyes. The arena collectively held its breath. Here was a 71-year-old man, standing motionless with his eyes closed, facing one of the most dangerous fighters in the world. It should have been suicide. Instead, it felt like a challenge of a completely different order. Malik couldn't resist. He threw a straight right hand, not his most powerful punch, but fast and accurate, aimed directly at Seagal's jaw. Without opening his eyes, Seagal turned his head exactly the minimum distance necessary. The punch passed so close that it disturbed his hair, but never made contact. Impossible, Malik breathed. Seagal opened his eyes, and there was something in them that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not aggression, but a kind of infinite patience mixed with profound sadness. You're fighting your own shadow, Seagal said. Every technique you throw carries your ego, your anger, your need to prove something. It makes you predictable. To demonstrate, he began to move, not toward Malik, but in a slow, flowing pattern, around the center of the cage. His movements were fluid, economical, like a river finding its natural course. There was no wasted motion, no tension, no indication that he was preparing for violence. Malik tried to track him, to find an opening, but every time he thought he saw one, Seagal was already somewhere else. It wasn't speed, it was timing so perfect it approached prescience. "Stand still and fight me," Malik shouted, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I am fighting you," Seagal replied, never breaking his flowing movement. "You're just fighting the wrong battle." Captain Sloan watched from cage side, her military training recognizing something profound in what she was witnessing. This wasn't combat as she understood it. This was education disguised as confrontation. Master Tenzin smiled slightly from his position behind her, his weathered hands folded in front of him. "The student is ready," he murmured to himself in Tibetan. Malik made one more desperate attempt, throwing himself forward in a tackle that would have taken down any conventional opponent. Seagal simply wasn't there when he arrived. Instead, Malik found himself grasping empty air as his momentum carried him forward. As he passed, Seagal placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, not to stop him, not to hurt him, but simply to acknowledge his effort. The touch was so brief and light that it barely registered physically, but emotionally it carried the weight of a mountain. Malik stumbled to the far side of the cage and spun around, his face flushed with exertion and embarrassment. For the first time in his professional career, he was completely out of ideas. "I don't understand," he said, and the admission cost him something fundamental. Steven Seagal stopped moving and faced him directly. "That," he said quietly, "is the beginning of wisdom." The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither man had expected to cross. Malik Jordan stood with his back against the cage, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths, while Steven Seagal remained centered in the middle of the octagon like a lighthouse in a storm. Unmovable, unflappable, radiating a calm that seemed to fill the entire arena. For the first time since entering the cage, Malik wasn't bouncing on his toes or throwing strikes. Instead, he stared at his opponent with something approaching wonder, trying to process what he had just experienced. "You're not even trying to hurt me," Malik said, the realization dawning in his voice. "No," Seagal replied simply. "I'm not." "Then what are you doing?" Seagal took a single step forward, and somehow that minimal movement changed everything. The space between them seemed to shrink dramatically, not because of distance, but because of presence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades spent understanding the deeper truths of combat. "I'm showing you what you've forgotten," Seagal said. "Fighting isn't about proving you're stronger than someone else. It's about understanding yourself." Malik shook his head, his worldview struggling to accommodate this new information. "That's philosophical bullshit. This is about winning and losing, about being the best." "Is it?" Seagal asked, and then he did something that changed the entire dynamic of their encounter. He extended his right hand, palm up, in a gesture of invitation rather than challenge. "Touch my hand," he said quietly. Malik stared at the outstretched palm suspiciously. "What kind of trick is this?" "No trick. Just touch my hand." Against his better judgment, Malik reached out and placed his palm against Seagal's. The contact was gentle, almost ceremonial, but the moment their skin made contact, Malik felt something extraordinary. Through that simple touch, he could feel Seagal's balance, his center, his complete and utter stillness. It was like touching the foundation of a mountain, utterly immovable, connected to something far deeper than physical strength. "Do you feel that?" Seagal asked. Malik nodded, unable to speak. "That's what real power feels like. Not the power to destroy, but the power to remain yourself no matter what chaos surrounds you. Seagal maintained the contact for another moment, then gently withdrew his hand. But something had passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words or techniques. Now, Seagal said, resuming his relaxed stance, try to hit me again. But this time, don't try to prove anything. Just move. Malik hesitated, then threw a careful jab, not the explosive attack he'd been using, but something more measured, more thoughtful. To his amazement, the strike came closer to landing than any of his more powerful attempts. Seagal deflected it gently, redirecting the force in a spiral motion that left Malik's arm extended but controlled. Better, he said approvingly. You're thinking instead of reacting. Encouraged, Malik tried a combination, left jab, right cross, but thrown with consideration rather than fury. Again, he came closer to success, though Seagal's defense remained flawless. I'm starting to understand, Malik said, breathing hard but with excitement rather than frustration. Understanding is the first step, Seagal replied. But understanding without practice is just theory. Around the arena, the crowd watched in fascination as the dynamic between the two fighters evolved. What had begun as a confrontation was transforming into something unprecedented, a public lesson in the deepest principles of martial arts. Tyler Knox lowered his phone, forgetting for the first time in years to perform for his audience. This is incredible, he whispered to himself. This isn't a fight. It's like watching a master teach a student. In the commentary booth, Javier Vega found his voice again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure we have adequate words for what we're witnessing. This has evolved far beyond competition into something approaching art. Malik threw another combination, this time incorporating some of Seagal's flowing movement. His strikes were still unsuccessful, but they carried a different quality, less desperate, more purposeful. You're learning, Seagal observed. But you're still thinking like a fighter instead of a martial artist. What's the difference? Seagal smiled for the first time since entering the cage, an expression of genuine warmth that transformed his entire face. A fighter tries to impose his will on his opponent. A martial artist tries to understand the situation so completely that the right action becomes obvious. To demonstrate, Seagal began moving again, but this time he narrated his actions. When you throw that right cross, you lean too far forward. Your weight shifts to your front foot, and you can't quickly change direction. As he spoke, he moved in the exact pattern that would exploit those weaknesses, though he made no attempt to actually strike. When you get frustrated, your combinations become predictable, always ending with either an uppercut or that spinning kick. Malik took a deep breath and squared his shoulders, but not in preparation for another attack. Instead, he was gathering courage for something much more difficult than fighting. I want to apologize, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. To Darius, to everyone here, to everyone watching. I came here thinking I was going to teach some lessons about the future beating the past. Instead, I'm the one who needed to learn. The words hung in the air, raw and honest. For a moment, the arena remained silent, processing this unprecedented display of humility from a fighter who had built his career on arrogance. Then, slowly, applause began to build. Not the wild cheering of a typical fight crowd, but something more respectful, more acknowledging. It started with the veterans section and spread throughout the arena, the sound of people recognizing genuine growth in real time. Seagal watched the crowd's reaction with satisfaction, but his attention remained focused on Malik. That, he said quietly, took more courage than anything you did in your previous 16 fights combined. Malik's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What happens now? Now, Seagal said, you discover what kind of fighter you really want to be. Will you teach me? The question surprised everyone, including Seagal himself. For a moment, the master considered the earnest young man before him, someone who had journeyed from arrogance to humility in the span of 20 minutes. Teaching and learning aren't transactions, Seagal said finally. They're relationships. They require trust, patience, and the willingness to be wrong more often than you're right. I'm willing, Malik said without hesitation. Seagal studied him for a long moment, reading something in the younger man's eyes that satisfied him. Then we begin with the hardest lesson of all. What's that? Learning to be still. The moment that followed would be discussed in martial arts circles for decades to come, not for its technical brilliance or athletic achievement, but for its profound simplicity. Steven Seagal and Malik Jordan stood facing each other in the center of the cage, but the energy between them had transformed completely from their initial confrontation. Being still doesn't mean being motionless, Seagal explained, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent arena. It means being present, centered, aware of everything around you without being disturbed by any of it. He demonstrated by assuming a simple standing position, feet shoulder-width apart, hands relaxed at his sides, spine straight, but not rigid. To most observers, he appeared to be doing nothing at all. But to those who understood martial arts on a deeper level, his stillness radiated power like heat from a forge. "Try it," he instructed. Malik attempted to mirror the position, but even standing still, his natural restlessness showed. His feet shifted slightly, his shoulders carried tension, his breathing was irregular. The contrast between the two men was striking, one a picture of composed readiness, the other fighting his own nervous energy. "I can't do it," Malik admitted after 30 seconds. "My mind keeps racing." "Of course it does," Seagal said patiently. "You've spent years training your body to be explosive, reactive, always ready for violence. Now you have to train it to be peaceful, responsive, ready for anything." Around the arena, the crowd watched in fascination as the lesson continued. This wasn't what anyone had expected when they bought tickets to see an MMA exhibition, but somehow it felt more important than any fight they'd ever witnessed. Captain Sloan found herself holding her breath, recognizing that her vision for the Sentinel Arena was being fulfilled in ways she had never imagined. This was exactly what she had hoped for, different kinds of warriors learning from each other, bridging the gap between past and present, between philosophy and practice. "Why is this so hard?" Malik asked, frustration creeping into his voice as he struggled to maintain the deceptively simple position. "Because stillness is the opposite of everything modern life teaches us," Seagal replied. "We're conditioned to always be doing something, proving something, achieving something. But real power comes from the spaces between actions, the pauses, between thoughts." To demonstrate, Seagal began moving through a series of slow, flowing movements. They weren't techniques exactly, more like a meditation in motion, each gesture flowing naturally into the next. His movements were so smooth, so economical, that they seemed to be occurring in slow motion despite being performed at normal speed. "This is Aikido," he explained as he moved. "Not just the physical techniques, but the philosophy behind them. We don't meet force with force, we redirect it. We don't destroy our opponents, we neutralize the conflict itself." Malik watched intently, trying to absorb not just the movements but the mindset behind them. "It looks like dancing." "In many ways, it is," Seagal agreed. "Both dancing and fighting are about rhythm, timing, and responding to your partner's energy. The difference is that dancing seeks harmony, while fighting usually seeks dominance." "But you can fight with it? Really fight?" Instead of answering with words, Seagal made a subtle gesture with his hand. "Attack me. One more time. But this time, don't try to hurt me, try to understand me." Malik hesitated, then threw a careful right hand, not the wild, ego-driven strikes from earlier, but something more thoughtful, more exploratory. Seagal didn't just deflect it. He accepted it, redirected it, and used Malik's own momentum to guide him into an off-balance position where a dozen different finishing techniques would have been available. But instead of capitalizing on the opening, Seagal simply stepped back and allowed Malik to recover. "Did you feel that?" Seagal asked. Malik nodded, his eyes wide. "It was like you were inside my technique, moving with it instead of against it. That's the difference between fighting and martial arts," Seagal explained. "Fighting is about imposing your will through force. Martial arts is about understanding the situation so completely that the right action becomes effortless." From the medical area, Darius Booker had been watching the entire exchange with growing amazement. Despite his injuries, despite being the one who had been disrespected and attacked, he found himself hoping that Malik would truly learn from this experience. As if reading his thoughts, Seagal turned toward the veteran and gestured for him to approach the cage. "Darius, would you join us?" The arena held its breath as the injured veteran slowly made his way to cage side. The cut on his temple was still visible beneath the bandage, and he moved with the careful gait of someone in pain, but his dignity remained intact. "I owe you an apology," Malik said before Darius could speak. "Not just for what I did to you physically, but for what I said, for how I treated you, for everything you represent that I was too stupid to understand." Darius studied the younger man's face, seeing something there that hadn't been present earlier, genuine remorse mixed with newfound understanding. "Apology accepted," Darius said simply. "But the real question is, what are you going to do with what you've learned?" It was Seagal who answered. He's going to start over. Not his career, his approach to everything. The techniques will remain the same, but the spirit behind them will be completely different. Malik nodded eagerly. "I want to be better, not just as a fighter, but as a person, as a man." "Then you will be," Seagal said with certainty. "Because wanting to change is the hardest part. Everything else is just practice." The crowd began to applaud again, but this time Seagal raised his hand for silence. He wasn't finished. "Everyone here tonight came expecting to see a fight," he said, his voice carrying to the furthest reaches of the arena. "But what you actually witnessed was something more important, transformation. Not through violence, but through understanding. Not through dominance, but through wisdom." He paused, looking around at the faces in the crowd, veterans and civilians, young and old, all united in having witnessed something profound. That's what real martial arts is about. Not proving you're better than someone else, but becoming better than you were before. The strongest victory isn't over your opponent, it's over your own limitations. Tyler Knox, who had been filming the entire exchange, finally lowered his phone completely. "I need to apologize too," he said to his audience, his voice choked with emotion. "To everyone watching, to everyone I've made fun of, to everyone whose story I've turned into content. I've been getting it all wrong." The transformation was rippling outward, touching everyone present. What had begun as one man's arrogance had become a catalyst for reflection and growth throughout the entire arena. Steven Seagal removed his gloves and set them carefully on the canvas. His work here was done, not because the fight was over, but because the real victory had been achieved. A young man's heart had been opened, a veteran's dignity had been restored, and everyone present had been reminded of what truly mattered. "Some battles," he said quietly, "are won not by fighting, but by refusing to fight. Some victories come not from defeating your opponent, but from transforming them into an ally." As he prepared to leave the cage, Malik called out one last question. "Master Seagal, how will I know when I've really learned what you're trying to teach me?" Seagal paused at the cage door, considering the question carefully. "When you can stand in front of a mirror," he said finally, "and like what you see." With that, he stepped out of the cage and into legend. The Sentinel Arena had never been quieter. In the moments following Steven Seagal's departure from the cage, 18,000 people sat in contemplative silence, processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't the stunned quiet that follows a brutal knockout or the anticipatory hush before a big announcement. This was something deeper, more profound. It was the silence of minds being fundamentally changed. Malik Jordan remained in the center of the cage, still standing in the position Seagal had taught him. His breathing had finally steadied. His shoulders had dropped their perpetual tension, and for the first time in years, his mind wasn't racing toward the next conquest, the next victory, the next way to prove his dominance. Instead, he found himself simply existing in the moment, feeling the canvas beneath his feet, the air moving in and out of his lungs. The profound stillness that Seagal had shown him was possible. Minutes passed, 3, 4, 5, and still. He didn't move. The television production crew exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to cut to commercial or continue filming this unprecedented display of introspection. Finally, Javier Vega broke the spell with a whisper that somehow carried through the arena's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed tonight." He paused, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. "In 30 years of covering combat sports, I've never seen anything like this. This wasn't a fight, it was a transformation. It was watching someone's soul wake up in real time." Tyler Knox sat in his ringside seat, his phone face down on his lap for the first time anyone could remember. The young influencer who had built his following on reactions and hot takes found himself speechless, tears streaming down his face as he grappled with his own reflection in what had just occurred. "I've been doing this all wrong," he said to his camera, finally picking it up but speaking in a tone his followers had never heard before. Quiet, contemplative, genuinely humbled. All of it. The hot takes, the manufactured drama, turning people's real struggles into content for clicks. "I've been Malik before," Seagal showed him the mirror. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring how it would look to his audience. "You know what? I'm going to tell you something I've never said in 3 years of doing this. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. I just say whatever gets the biggest reaction. But watching someone actually grow up in front of us, man, I need to figure out who I really want to be." Around the arena, similar conversations were taking place. Veterans who had come expecting a simple exhibition found themselves discussing philosophy with their children. Casual MMA fans found themselves questioning what they really wanted from their entertainment. Corporate sponsors who had bought VIP packages to network and schmooze sat in contemplative silence, wondering what any of their business dealings actually meant in the larger context of human dignity and growth. Captain Anika Sloan stood at cage side, tears openly flowing down her cheeks. Her vision for the Sentinel Arena had been to create a space where different kinds of warriors could meet with mutual respect, but what had actually occurred exceeded her wildest dreams. This wasn't just respect, it was transformation, education, the literal manifestation of the idea that conflict could become catalyst for growth rather than destruction. Master Tenzin appeared beside her, as if materializing from the ether, his weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "The student teaches the teacher who teaches the student," he said in his heavily accented English. "The circle completes itself. Is this what you expected when you told him now the river bends?" Sloan asked. The old monk's eyes twinkled with something approaching mischief. "I expected nothing. I hoped for everything. Tonight, hope met reality." In the medical area, Darius Booker sat on the examination table, declining for the third time the medic's suggestion that he go to the hospital for a more thorough evaluation. The cut on his temple had stopped bleeding, but more importantly, the wound to his dignity had been healed by what he'd witnessed. "Lieutenant," a young paramedic approached hesitantly. "There's someone here who wants to speak with you." Darius looked up to see Malik Jordan standing in the doorway, no longer the swaggering, arrogant fighter who had humiliated him earlier. This young man's entire bearing had changed. His shoulders were relaxed, his eyes were clear, and his presence carried none of the aggressive energy that had defined him just an hour ago. "Sir," Malik said, and the word carried genuine respect. "I know I already apologized in the cage, but I needed to do it properly. Person to person, not for the cameras." Darius studied him carefully, his cop instincts and military training, reading the young man's body language, his tone, the sincerity in his eyes. What he saw satisfied him. "I appreciate that," Darius said simply. "But the question isn't whether I forgive you. It's whether you can forgive yourself and do better going forward." Malik nodded slowly. "Master Seagal told me the same thing. He said the real work starts when the cameras stop rolling." "Smart man. You planning to listen to him?" "Yes, sir. I want to start over. Not my career. That can stay successful or not. I don't care anymore. But my approach to everything. The way I treat people, the way I think about competition, the way I think about myself." Darius extended his hand, and this time when Malik reached for it, there was no hesitation, no game playing. Just two men acknowledging each other's humanity. "Then you honor everyone who served by becoming someone worthy of their sacrifice," Darius said. "That's how you really make this right." Back in the arena, the crowd was beginning to stir, but reluctantly, as if leaving would somehow diminish what they had experienced. Parents were having conversations with their children about respect and growth. Veterans were sharing stories with civilians who finally understood that service meant more than just wearing a uniform. Young fighters in the audience were texting their coaches, asking about philosophy classes and meditation training. The ripple effects were spreading beyond the arena walls too. Social media exploded not with highlight reels of violence, but with clips of Seagal's quiet wisdom, Malik's transformation, and Tyler Knox's emotional admission of his own need for growth. The hashtag #RealWarrior began trending, filled not with boasts and challenges, but with stories of personal transformation and the courage to change. Steven Seagal himself had disappeared into the Atlanta night, as quietly as he had arrived, declining all interview requests and photo opportunities. Those who knew him understood. His work was done, and true masters didn't linger to receive credit for their teaching. The lesson would speak for itself, and those who were ready to hear it would hear it regardless of who got the credit. As the arena slowly began to empty, Malik Jordan finally moved from his position in the center of the cage. But he didn't swagger or strut as he had during his entrance. Instead, he walked with the measured, purposeful gait of someone who had discovered that true strength came not from dominating others, but from mastering himself. The transformation was complete, but the real journey was just beginning. 3 months later, the reverberations of that night at the Sentinel Arena were still being felt throughout the combat sports world and beyond. The footage of Steven Seagal's philosophical dismantling of Malik Jordan had been viewed over 200 million times across various platforms, spawning countless discussions about the nature of strength, the purpose of combat sports, and the difference between fighting and martial arts. But for Malik Jordan, the numbers and viral fame meant nothing. He sat in the pre-dawn darkness of a small Aikido dojo in suburban Atlanta, his breathing steady and deep as he maintained the same centered stance Seagal had taught him that night. The flashy gym with its celebrity trainers and Instagram-worthy equipment had been replaced by this humble space with wooden floors worn smooth by decades of practitioners seeking something deeper than mere physical technique. The young man who had once bounced on his toes with explosive energy now found power in stillness. The fighter who had built his identity on undefeated records and highlight reel knockouts was learning to measure success in terms of inner peace and genuine respect for his opponents. "You're improving," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Sensei Takashi, the elderly Japanese master who ran the dojo, entered with the quiet dignity that seemed to characterize all true martial artists. "Your mind is finally catching up with your body." Malik bowed respectfully, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past 3 months. "Thank you, Sensei. I still have so far to go." "We all do. That's what makes it a journey rather than a destination." The dojo's simple wooden walls were decorated with calligraphy scrolls and photos of the lineage of masters who had passed down the art through generations. There were no trophy cases, no posters of famous victories, no celebration of dominance over others. Instead, the space radiated the quiet dignity of people committed to bettering themselves rather than proving themselves superior to others. Malik's phone buzzed with its usual barrage of fight offers, sponsorship opportunities, and media requests. His manager had been calling daily, frustrated by his client's newfound reluctance to take fights purely for money or fame. But Malik barely glanced at the notifications anymore. His priorities had fundamentally shifted. "Sensei," he said as they began the morning's training, "do you think Master Seagal knew what would happen that night? Did he plan it all?" The old master considered the question as he demonstrated a flowing defensive movement. Planning implies forcing a particular outcome. True masters don't force. They create conditions for growth and allow nature to take its course. Like a gardener who plants seeds and provides water, but cannot force the flower to bloom. They moved through the morning kata together, the same flowing movements Seagal had demonstrated in the cage, but where Malik had once seen weakness. In the gentle redirections and circular motions, he now understood the profound strength required to neutralize aggression without causing harm. Across town, Tyler Knox was experiencing his own transformation. The social media influencer who had built his following on manufactured drama and hot takes had pivoted dramatically, turning his platform into something focused on personal growth and authentic conversations. His follower count had initially dropped by nearly half, but the engagement was deeper, more meaningful, and somehow more rewarding than anything he had built before. "What's up, everyone?" he said to his camera, but gone was the hyped-up energy and manufactured excitement. Instead, he spoke with quiet sincerity. "Today marks 3 months since the night that changed everything for me. Since the night I realized I was using other people's stories for my own gain instead of actually caring about their humanity." He paused, looking directly into the lens with clear, honest eyes. "I've been getting a lot of questions about why I changed my whole approach, why I'm not doing reaction videos anymore, why I'm not jumping on every controversy that trends. The answer is simple. I finally looked in the mirror and realized I didn't like what I saw. The response to his new content had been mixed. Some of his original followers missed the drama and spectacle, but he found himself sleeping better at night, feeling more connected to his audience as human beings rather than view counts. At the Sentinel Arena, Captain Anika Sloan was planning the venue's next event, but with a completely different philosophy. Instead of marquee fights designed to generate maximum revenue, she was organizing a series of exhibitions focused on the intersection of martial arts and personal development. The first event would feature wounded veterans training alongside active fighters, with the emphasis on mutual respect and shared growth rather than competition. The response has been incredible, she told her staff during a planning meeting. We're getting inquiries from schools wanting to bring student groups, from therapy organizations working with veterans and at-risk youth, from corporate teams, looking for authentic team-building experiences. What happened that night showed us what people are really hungry for. Darius Booker had become an unexpected celebrity in his own right, not for being a victim, but for the dignity with which he had handled the situation and his role in Malik's transformation. He'd been invited to speak at police academies, military bases, and community centers about resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to be vulnerable. People ask me if I'm angry about what happened, he told a group of young officers during a recent training session. But anger would mean I learned nothing from the experience. That young man taught me something important that night. Sometimes the people who disrespect us the most are the ones who need our compassion the most. Steven Seagal himself remained largely out of the public eye, declining most interview requests and maintaining his characteristic privacy. But those close to him knew he followed the ongoing transformations with quiet satisfaction. He had achieved what every true teacher hopes for. His students had surpassed their need for him and were now teaching others. On this particular morning, as Malik completed his training and prepared to leave the dojo, Sensei Takashi handed him a small piece of paper with an address written in careful handwriting. "What's this?" Malik asked. "There's a young fighter there who reminds me of someone I once knew. He's talented, successful, and completely lost. He could use a friend who understands what it means to find yourself." Malik looked at the address, understanding immediately what was being asked of him. The circle was completing itself. The student was ready to become the teacher. That evening, at the same time Seagal had stood up from his front row seat 3 months earlier, Malik Jordan stood outside a gymnasium in downtown Atlanta. Through the windows, he could see a young fighter training with the same aggressive intensity, the same desperate need to prove dominance that had once defined his own approach. He took a deep breath, centered himself in the way Seagal had taught him, and walked through the door. Not as a former champion looking to reclaim glory, but as someone who had learned that the strongest victories were won not over opponents, but over the limitations of one's own understanding. "Excuse me," he said to the young fighter, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that comes from true strength rather than manufactured bravado. "I was wondering if you'd like to learn something that might change your whole perspective on what it means to be a warrior." The young man looked at him suspiciously, seeing someone who carried himself differently than the typical gym rats and hangers-on who usually tried to give unsolicited advice. "Who are you?" the fighter asked. Malik smiled, remembering a night when he had asked a similar question and received an answer that changed everything. "I'm someone who learned that the real fight isn't against other people," he said simply. "It's against the voice in your head that tells you that you're not enough unless you're better than everyone else." As he began to share his story, Malik realized that this was what Seagal had meant about the mirror. When he looked at this young fighter, he saw not an opponent to be defeated or a competitor to be intimidated, but a reflection of his former self, someone worthy of compassion, guidance, and the same patient teaching that had transformed his own life. The ripples continued to spread, one person at a time, one moment of authentic connection replacing manufactured conflict, one small victory of understanding over ego. And somewhere in the city, Steven Seagal sat in quiet meditation, knowing that the most important battles were won not with fists or feet, but with the courage to help others become the best versions of themselves. Some warriors, after all, don't raise their voice. They lower the noise. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.